Alright guys, so following up, we're going to talk about additive animations in this one. So to get started, I'm going to explain to you what an additive animation is in case you don't know. Uh, Whenever you first start learning how to handle animations in an anim graph, one of the first things that you learn is layered blend per bone. And so just to cover that, you can add a branch filter or you can use a blend mask, and you might do something like this with a depth of like 4. And what the depth means is how many bones away from this bone it will influence the animation that's plugged in right here. And what ends up happening is on when you're learning this, it's almost always the case that they have you play a lower body animation on the base pose, and then on the blend pose 0, they have you play the upper body animation, and it comes out looking like the character is being controlled by two different people, where the lower body appears to be moving independent of the upper body. It looks unnatural, and so that's the reason why we normally use additives. And so uh, an additive is stored as deltas. So it's represented as differences between bone rotations between one pose and another pose. So a lot can go wrong whenever you're making additives inside of Unreal. There are a lot of nuances when working with animations in Unreal Engine right now, and I'll try to cover all of them, but I might miss some of them, and I might accidentally make some of those mistakes that I'm trying to keep you all from doing inside of here. But for every frame of this animation, it will find the difference between its current rotation of, say, the upper arm R on this one and on this one. Currently, that rotational offset is 0 because they're both in the same place. But if we simulate this and we pause this, now on this frame, you can see that the upper arm R is in a different place. And so there's a rotational offset between these two. And you can think of that like this. So let's just say that this is your base pose and this is your animation you want to be additive. So if this is the x-axis of the upper arm R, then this might be the delta or the offset between the two, which is 25 degrees. So if we apply that on the anim graph to this animation right here, then it's going to add 25 degrees to where it is currently at. Because of that, let's go into play mode. Because of that, depending on the offset of that animation we're applying it to, the additive will come out looking different. And so if we rotate that lower arm by 45 degrees inwards towards the body, you'll see the effect it has on the end result. And if we rotate it 45 degrees in the opposite direction, you'll see the effect it has on it when we do that. And if you want to look and see what's going on, you can go to the details and go to skeletal mesh and browse to that animation asset and open it up. And you'll see that I'm playing an animation, and then right after that, on the event graph, I'm getting that slider value, and I'm applying that as the rotational offset on the X rotation of that lower arm R. And then I'm applying the additive animation. So that's what's going on there, guys. So now that you have a basic understanding of how additives work in practice, let's actually create one. Now, when we're creating this, you'll understand why in the last video, whenever I created this animation, we had that corrective bone offset. So I'll go over that and some other nuances as well. So let's go ahead and create a third-person project, and we'll call this Additives. And just give it a minute. So the first thing we want to do is we want to remove these walls because we're going to be using a control rig to modify this, and it's going to place it right here in the world whenever we do. So the first thing we'll do is go to Characters folder, Mannequins, Animations, and Many, and we'll find a pose to start ours off with. So the first thing you need to know whenever you're dealing with creating assets from the animation editor and baking these to the control rig from the animation editor, using edit and sequence and CR mannequin body, is that the preview mesh that we have applied currently is going to have a direct effect on it. And so the Unreal Engine 5 third-person template, it has it set to the female, but that's misleading because all of this is actually set up for the male. And so if we go over here and we create an asset, it's going to offset things and the legs are going to look funny. So what we need to do first is we need to actually set this to the SKM Mani Simple. If you want to use the actual weapon R bone, the SKM Mani Simple does not have the weapon R bone. And you can tell by scrolling down here, and you can see that it doesn't have the weapon L bone, and that's indicated by that circle. It does not have the corrective bones either. It doesn't have the weapon R bone, and so those will all, if you try to connect something to those, it'll be at the origin of the root. So you have to be aware of that. So let's apply this asset, because we're in our example, we're actually going to use, we don't need the weapon R bone, so we're not going to use that. So the first thing we want to do is apply that, and then we're going to create our animation from this current pose. And so under animations, we'll just go ahead and say anim idle pose. And if we do that, you shouldn't see the character move. If the character moved, you didn't do it right. The next thing we need to do is we need to go to rigs and we need to open up the CR mannequin body. This is what we're going to use to bake it, but we need to constrain the IK bones. It's important that y'all guys understand and become familiar with adding these constraints if you're going to be using a control rig at all. So the first thing that we're going to do actually is we're going to right click on this root and we're going to refresh it. And the reason why is if you drop down this pelvis, you'll see we have no IK bones. That's because when they made this, they deliberately selected the IK bones and they deleted them. I don't know why they did that, but they did that on purpose for some reason. But let's right click and go to refresh and go to select mesh. And we can just scroll down here and select SKM Mani Simple. And what that does is it'll add those IK bones back into it, as you can clearly see here. You can remove the interaction bone and the center of mass bone since we won't actually be needing those. The reason why I didn't use the simple one is because the simple one will give us those, but it'll also give us all of the corrective bones as well, and we don't need those. And whenever you add the corrective bones, that's actually what caused that problem I told y'all I would tell y'all about in the last video, with the corrective bone being offset during the creation of the baking of the animation using the control rig. That's actually what was causing that. So we need to exclude those actually from this. You could actually manually go to refresh and select the SKM Mani and then manually delete all those bones from this hierarchy, all those corrective bones. But in my case, and to simplify this, we're just going to do it this way. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to expand this, We're going to shift select the handgun and the IK hand R and L. And then we're going to control select the IK foot L and IK foot R. We're going to drag it over here and we're going to set these bones on the forward solver. We need to connect these like I'm doing here, and then expand these item entries so that we can see what bones they're for. And then under the pelvis, we're going to select hand L and drag that out over here and say get bone, because we want to get the transform of that bone, and we want to set the IK bones transform to be that of these bones. We're going to do the same with the hand R. We're going to get that. Make sure you connected this. Don't forget to connect it. If you want, you can create a control for the IK handgun bone so that you can offset it in relation to that. But for this example, I'm not going to do that because it'll make it longer than it's already going to be. And now make sure you're not using the ball bones. We want to use the foot bones. So drag out the foot R and get that and connect it to the IK foot R. And now do the same thing with the left foot. Make sure you're grabbing the foot L. I accidentally grabbed the other one the last time I tried to make this video, so I restarted the video and I'm doing it over. So save that, compile it, make sure the IK hand gun and the IK hand R are set to the hand R. Make sure the IK hand gun bone precedes the IK hand R and IK hand L, because when the IK hand gun is moved, it's going to move these other bones, and so we need to have these set after the IK hand gun bone is set. So order of operations is really important in this scenario. For the feet, it doesn't really matter. So now that we've got that set up, we're going to save that, and we're going to say edit and sequencer, bake to control rig, CR mannequin body, and bake. Now the first thing we need to do whenever we do this with the single pose animation is we need to delete this extra keyed frame on the end that it adds. If you don't do that, then you're going to have odd results. The second thing I always do is I always right click on this and go to add section, additive, and then I zoom out and I add one frame. If you don't do that, then the last frame of your animation will pop back to wherever it was on the base. After we've done all that, we can rotate the spine. I'm just going to do 20 degrees, 10 and 10. Oops. And then on the head, I'm going to rotate that 70. It doesn't really matter. You can make it do whatever you want. But I'm going to offset this hand. Normally you wouldn't do that, but because he's not holding a rifle and his hand is swinging by his side during the jog animation, I don't want that to cause his hand to enter the body over here, the pelvis region. So I'm going to offset it outwards. If this was for a rifle holding animation, you would want to offset both of these the same way. And so normally what you would do is change these over to IK mode, and you would constrain one IK control to the other IK control. That way, whenever you move one, it'll move the other while maintaining that offset. Now that we've created our additive animation, we can set it up. So we're going to go into our animations folder where we saved it. And we are going to go to the asset details. Since this is a single frame animation, I'm just going to say step, but actually it's really not important, so you don't have to do that. It's just a habit I like to get into. Also, I like to set these to loop if they're supposed to be looping. That's not really necessary either, but it's a good habit to get into. Under the additive settings, we're going to set this to local space. You can set this to mesh space. Mesh space has a better effect on the body, so you can do that. In fact, we'll just go ahead and do that in mesh space. We're going to say selected animation frame. And so before I start, I want to go ahead and actually explain all this to you, what these different things are for. So frame from this animation would be if you had, say, for example, this animation right here is, I meant to simulate that, sorry. This animation right here, we're actually using the frame from the first frame from this animation as the reference. So in situations like this, where you just want to get that motion itself applied to the animation, you might actually want to simply use frame from this animation and use the first frame, which is frame 0. In some cases, you might have an aim sweep where it starts off with him aiming up in the air and looking back over his and up. And then it might end with him looking down and aiming down, but the center frame might have him pointing straight. And so in a situation like that, you might actually want to use that center frame, frame 15, for example, on if it was a 30 frame animation, then it might be frame 15 that you want to use. For a selected animation frame, that allows you to select a specific frame and use that single frame as a reference from an animation. And so that's the one we're going to use. In some cases, you might not want to use a single frame from the animation to apply deltas based off of. And so in some cases, I don't have an example for you, but there might be a case where you might want every frame of that animation to be used as a base. And so this animation will be playing frame by frame, and every single time the delta off of this will be different since the base animation rotations are changing. Like I said, I can't think of a use scenario for that, but I'm sure there is one. Skeleton reference pose. If you made this from the actual skeleton default pose like this, if you actually made that additive from this pose, if I say go up here and I go to create animation from current pose, if I did that, then, and I created my offset, my look left from that, then I would want to use the skeleton reference pose as the base pose. So anyway, moving on, we're going to use the selected animation frame, and we are going to go to Mani, and we're going to choose Idle, and we're going to set that, and we're going to use the first frame off of that as our reference pose. So now we've set it up. We're going to move on. Let's go to the animations folder and open up the ABP Mani. We're going to go to Anim Graph, and we are going to drag this out. And since we created that as an mesh space additive animation, we need to apply it in mesh space. So we're going to say apply. Normally, if it were in local space, we would apply the additive, but with it being a mesh space, we want to apply mesh space additive. We are going to right click on this and convert to single frame animation. Because this is a single pose and not a full-blown animation, we're just going to play this single frame from it. You can make sure that the should loop is checked. If not, it'll play it and then stop. But yeah, so it'll set that by default when you change it to a single frame. So if we did all of this right, then when we compile it, you should only see him looking to the left. If the legs or pelvis moved, then it's because of this foot IK system, and you didn't constrain the IK bones correctly. So if you go to characters and bones and all hierarchy, those bones pointing from the root to the feet and pointing from the root to the hands, those should be where the hands and the feet are. If they are, well, if the IK is connected, they will anyway. But just disconnect that, and if the feet move after you disconnect that, then you'll know that's the reason why. Anyway, moving on. The reason why I offset it when I connect it is because this control rig, it drops the pelvis slightly so that the feet can reach the ground. That's the reason why it does that. So now that we've done that, we can play these animations in here, and we won't have any adverse effects on the feet or legs. You'll notice that we don't have any unwanted rotations on them. That's pretty much it, guys. So yeah, you might want to watch through this video a couple of times, because some of those nuances that I went over, you might have missed them, or they might have just not sunk in. But if you're not careful, you will repeat those same mistakes over and over again. So I really recommend that when you're creating these additives, do them externally in Maya or Blender, if you don't mind doing that, because doing things in Unreal, as far as animation goes, a lot can go wrong. The animation tools in Unreal are still under development, so keep that in mind. And I will see you in the next video.